Welcome to the MimeCast, a chance for people who are Mime Troupe fans to get to know some of the Mime Troupe veterans and current folks just a little bit better. Chance to see them and hear from them, not just on stage. And this time, super happy to have Mime Troupe veteran and veteran of veterans, Randy Craig. How you doing, Randy?
I'm doing well. How about you?
It's been weird. What can I
It's
say?
been weird.
It's
This
been
electronic
strange.
thing sucks, but what's all we got? So there you go.
Yeah. And you were saying you've been teaching all day?
I've been teaching all day, but not to mention 18 high school students on Zoom in two groups, which is completely nuts because their equipment varies and their connectivity varies, and it's nuts. Boy, oh boy. Tired of this, but I think I'm not the only one who's tired of it.
Oh yeah, sit back a little bit. I'm missing your eyes in the picture. Yeah, there. Um, so what I want to know about you is all I want to know is everything. So
Oh,
let's start with you being born. Where were you born?
I was born in our nation's capital in Washington, D.C.
Really?
Yeah.
Well, I assume you were, of course, born there because you wanted to be near your mother. What were your parents doing in D.C.?
My father was working for the FCC, the Federal Communications Commission. He'd been working for them during the war because he was a 4F, so he did that as a war effort, you know.
Huh.
So we were actually living in Maryland, right across the line, and so the nearest hospital was in D.C. So we went there and did the deed.
What did he do for the FCC?
He was what they call an electrical engineer. Among other things, he was a ham operator, a radio
Oh,
amateur.
really?
Yeah, and he did Morse code and everything. He was amazingly good at Morse code. So he did communications stuff like that. I'm not really sure what he did, but because if I knew,
Well,
he'd have to kill me.
right, he'd have to. So how did he get into ham radio? I mean, because that's like, back in the days when ham radio was, it wasn't like it in the 50s and 60s, it became a bigger deal. But so he was in ham radio in the 30s?
Yeah, yeah. Like I say,
Wow.
he was a bit of an invalid, especially as a child. Although as an adult, he was okay. But so as a stay-at-home kind of invalid, he got into radio communications and stuff.
Hmm. Where was he from? Where's his family?
He's actually born in Scotland, and
Really?
he had this debilitating bone disease called osteomyelitis, and the Scottish doctors in about 1920 or 1925 were going to amputate his arm and his leg. And his
Hmm.
father said, "Oh no, you're not." So he found this clinic in Switzerland, whose main technique was exercise and sunshine, and
Hmm.
they cured him. He
Wow.
had surgery, but basically they saved his arm and his leg, and they cured him. He spent a number of years in bed, but he's got all four limbs, because his father
Wow.
said, And
Huh.
his health was not too good, needless to say. And so his father, my grandfather, who was a scholar, went out to California and came across from Scotland, went out to California and got a job tutoring the Hearst kids and and
Wow.
and hung out at Hearst Castle and stuff. But then he got a job at Cal and became a professor at Cal in Berkeley and did stayed there until he retired and died. Yeah. So he
Huh.
was my father basically grew up in Berkeley.
Wow. And where did you, and what about your mother? Was she also an immigrant, or was she from here, or as
She
here as one
she
can
grew
get?
up in Southern Oregon. Very
Uh-huh.
and champ that she was. She vowed that she would go to college since she had zero money. So she
Uh-huh.
went to college for a year and got into USC actually, and so
Wow.
went to college for a year and then worked a year, and then a college
Uh-huh.
year, worked a year back and forth. And it took her 9 years, but she eventually did graduate from college, which had been her big goal in life. She wanted to get out of her situation in life, her class or whatever, and
Yeah.
she did, and she became a solid member of the middle class, as my father was. They both liked classical music, and they met. I forgot. I don't know how they met, but their mutual interest was classical music, and they started going together, going to concerts together, and very quickly got married.
Huh. And they met in Berkeley?
No, they met in Southern California. My father was down in Southern County, California. Wait a minute, is that where they met? Interesting question. Must have been. Yeah, my father eventually moved to Southern California and worked for an outfit called Convair, which was an aircraft defense company.
Mm-hmm.
I'm a defense company brat. I was raised by bomb money.
Well, at least it went to some good use.
Yeah.
So you, when I ask about your mother, so what was her heritage? Like your father was Scottish, was
She
your
had a
mother
mixed
just?
heritage, German and some other things. One of her early relatives came across the country in a covered wagon.
Oh, so they had been on this continent for a very long time.
Yeah, yeah.
Huh. Wow. So, oh, and what was her degree in? Since she took
Art
those
history.
years? Art history?
Yeah.
Oh, wow. And his was what?
His was in engineering, electrical engineering.
Oh, electrical engineering, right.
Said
So
he
they
went to
meet,
Cal. He says he never worked so hard in his life. He said he can't believe how he did it.
huh. Wow. And so how did they, I don't know if you know, how did they meet you were saying they were in Southern California. What was your father doing your father was working for
For Convair.
for Convair, and your mother was she teaching or what?
She was, I don't know what she was doing. Or maybe they met in New York. I don't know. I don't know. She actually had a job in New York City working for Steinway as a
Oh,
secretary,
wow.
and met Rubinstein, not Rubinstein, but Rachmaninoff and a couple of other
Wow.
famous people. She was thrilled because, like I say, she was a classical music nut. But for some reason, they met in Southern California through a mutual friend and
Huh.
hit it off right away.
Yeah, whirlwind romance.
Yeah, they were
And
kind of both wallflowers, and so
mm,
they were very attractive. So it was very nice, and they stayed married until she died. I guess they were married 50 years or something like that, or maybe more. I forget.
wow.
It's
So
amazing.
this is all this is they're in Southern California, or at least on the West Coast during the Depression, but they both have jobs fairly
They did.
young, it sounds like.
They did have jobs. Yeah, yeah,
Wow. And then, oh, so what took them? Did they go to DC because of the FCC job,
yeah,
or so that took them there?
yeah.
Oh, interesting. So, because that's such a huge move, and
Especially in those days. Yeah.
yeah, and I'm not even sure like how old is the FCC?
Oh, I don't know that, but I can
Was
tell
it
you
a
about
new
the
thing?
travel time. I remember I grew up in Southern California, and we had relatives. It was in Pomona, California, which is east of LA, and we had
Hmm.
relatives in Berkeley and San Francisco. And when we went to visit them, it was a 2 day trip, a 2 day car trip. I remember
Wow.
that when the speed limit changed from 40 to 45.
Because you're there a little sooner.
Yeah.
That's that's a lot. So
But
going
yeah,
across
travel
country.
was a whole different story in those days. It was a 5 day, 6 day car trip to go across the United States.
Wow. Yeah.
It's
Or
big.
back when you're taking a plane, you had to stop a few times.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely.
So they go to um to DC or the Virginia DC or Maryland DC, sorry. And they're he's working for the FCC. And what is your mother doing during that time?
Housekeeper. She
Mhm.
was not working. She didn't work ever in the marriage. Once she got married, she didn't work.
Huh. Well, guess those were well, besides the job of raising people like you.
Yeah, my sister I have a younger sister who's 3 years younger. But
Mhm.
yeah, those are the days. I mean, the 40s and 50s. Women didn't do a lot of work. I mean, some did, of course, but she didn't, and well, none of her friends did.
They didn't
Yeah,
have to work outside of the house
right.
because a lot of it, I think, because of the expansion of the government, especially if you've got somebody in the family that's got a government job, that's going to be actual income and perhaps housing and retirement. So big difference from nowadays.
Ain't that the truth?
So yeah, so they were in. How long were they married before they had you?
A couple of years.
A couple of years. So they didn't were like, hey, we're married, woo, kids. Um, and so by the time you were born, your father was already working for the FCC.
Yeah. It's interesting you're asking me all these questions that I don't really know exact answers to. It's I don't
Yeah.
even know who to ask. They're gone. So I'd have to look back and see. There are some diaries and stuff. So I have to check
Oh,
that.
really?
But those are the basics of the story.
Huh. I mean, that's interesting that they're diaries because it's like when my father passed away, before he passed away about 17 years ago. But before he passed away, he started writing all of this stuff down.
Oh,
And he was trying to actually, because my mother had passed away back in the 80s, and he was like, I want to write the story of my wife. But what he ended up doing was writing all this stuff that me and my sisters just didn't know. And we were going through it afterwards, and we're like, that's how we moved to San Francisco because of that. We moved because of this and all of this stuff about the family that we had no idea about. So if you've got any of that stuff, really go back and read it. It can be fascinating.
well, I asked him to write basically an autobiography, and he wrote about 75 pages
Hmm.
before he died. It was a couple of years before he died, because I wanted to know.
Yeah.
It's amazing how little we know about our ancestors. I mean, a couple of generations ago is probably it.
Yeah. If you're lucky.
Yeah.
And you find, and you always think that there's going to be more time. When you're young and your parents are telling you some story and you're like, yeah. Ooh, the Depression or whatever it was, the Korean War. And you're like, I'm living in this time now. And then later you start thinking about all of the stuff that you want to know and getting the perspective. So like I said, even if you've got those 75 pages, it's like seeing pictures of your parents when they were your age or when they were kids. And it looks like them, but you're like, that is so weird, But anyway, so you're born. Woohoo!
National holiday. Yeah.
Yeah, right. So now growing up in DC do you remember being a little kid there?
No, I didn't grow up in D.C. We moved very soon at age or 3 or 4 to San Diego.
What? Why? Because war was over and.
Once again, he got a job at Convair in San Diego.
Mm.
Well, I went to kindergarten there, kindergarten and first grade there. Mm-hmm. Then he was transferred up to Pomona, Convair in Pomona, which is where I grew up from second grade till I graduated from high school.
Oh, wow. And very different. I mean, it's like so San Diego is very much a Navy-based town.
Yep.
And I don't know Pomona very well. What is it? Is it also a Navy base?
No, it's not. There's no military presence particular there at all. No, it was a small town. I don't even know why Convair was there. Maybe the land was cheap or something like that. But it was a very small town. It was 35,000 people.
Mm.
Kind of semi-rural. One of my first job was at the Los Angeles County Fair, which was in Pomona, and I was working in a root beer stand, and I was right next door to the country radio station. It's KWOW, Country K-Wow, ladies and gentlemen. That's where I learned a whole lot of my early music, early country music. I first heard of Johnny Cash and all those people because of that radio station I was working next door to. But it was a very small town. Now and then, my parents were still interested in classical music, so there was a concert series that came like 6 times a year.
Wow!
We saw that. I saw Segovia play, and I saw the Concertgebouw Orchestra play, and other things. I don't remember other things, but that was a big event. And then one time, my mom took me into L.A. to see Peter Pan with Mary Martin.
Wow!
Yeah, and Cyril Richard as Captain Hook. I'll never forget that show.
Wow!
We were up in the 47th balcony.
Get to see the tops of everybody's heads.
Yeah.
How old were you?
I must have been 10 or 12, something like that.
So they were still both in. So when you were saying that these like orchestras and stuff would come through town, where did they play in Pomona? Was there like a community center or a?
Must have been. I think that you see Pomona College in Claremont, which is the next town over, and that's probably where we went to see them.
Yeah, they probably had an auditorium.
They have several auditoriums. I went to Pomona. I moved away and yada yada, came back, and I eventually went to Pomona College.
Huh.
Luckily, because friends helped me get in and stuff.
Wow. So how did you land the sweet root beer selling gig?
I don't remember.
Now, one of the things, talking to people, there's this thing where some people, like, they didn't work at all before they went to college, or they worked for their parents or things like that. Did you start like trying to do gigs when you were young?
Well, not music gigs. I wasn't a musician. I was playing
But I
piano,
mean, just
classical piano.
working money gigs.
Yeah, well, I don't know if it was my first job, maybe the root beer stand. Anyway, I was a box boy at Alpha Beta for a
Hmm.
while, and I had several jobs in high school. I've always had jobs while I was going to school. Even when I was at Pomona, I was a waiter and a dishwasher and stuff like that.
Huh. So are you doing it for the dough, or you doing it just to get
Oh,
out, or have?
no, the dough. Yeah, pocket money. Yeah.
Yeah. So now, one of the things also that comes up sometimes for people that are performers or actors or musicians is one of the common things I've found are people that move a lot use their art. It's like one of the things that you can take with you. You can't take your friends, you can't take all of this stuff, but art ends up being a way to kind of introduce yourself and to reinvent yourself every place you go. So at what age did you start being interested in kind of, oh, well, do you remember being that point where you're like, I want to do this rather than I'm just
I
listening?
remember that, but where I got started, I was in high school. As I said, I played classical music, but that was nothing that I ever shared with anybody. But I became a folkie in high school,
Hmm.
and I picked up the guitar and the banjo and played, zillions of hours of folk music, and made a bunch of friends, and that's what started me performing. I think, at least performing music. I was also interested in theater, and I did plays in high school. I don't know.
Really?
I was always interested in performing one way or another. I don't know how that came about. Maybe it came
So-
through the piano lessons. Here's a nice story. I had this little old lady piano teacher named Miss Johnson, and I started when I was in second grade, and I all through high school, and I quit when I left town when I graduated in high school. But then I joined the San Francisco Mime Troupe. You may have heard.
I heard of them. Yeah,
We
quite.
called it the Mime Troupe in those days, of
Yeah.
course. Well, you remember that. You were in it then too. But
Yes.
anyway, so we were on tour, and I forget what show you. Maybe it was a show you were in. I don't remember which one it was, but anyway, we're touring Southern California, and I was one of the truck drivers. So I called up Miss Johnson. I hadn't seen her in a few years, my little old lady piano teacher from Pomona. I called her up and I said, "Can I come visit?" "Oh yes, come." So here I was with hair down, hair and a big beard and beads and the whole thing. I don't know if it was beads, but it was full on hippie, right?
Yeah.
And this little lady, I made an appointment and I drove the Mime Troupe truck out to her little studio, and I knocked on the door, and she comes to the door and she looks up. And she says, "Are you Randall?" I said, "Yes, Miss Johnson, it's me." She said, "Oh well, come in." So we sat down and had Hawaiian punch and cookies, just like we had when I was coming up. And she says, "We'll play." And I said, "Well, I played a little bit." I said, "I'm really not a player these days. I'm an actor, and I'm in this theater company." And she said, "Well, what's it about?" And I said, "Okay, here goes." Because my background was a solid conservative, and that's
Oh
another
yeah.
story. But so I said, "Okay, here goes." I said, "Well, Miss Johnson, we're in this theater company, and we're working against the Vietnam War." And she goes, "Oh, I can't tell you. Oh, how much? Oh, I agree with you. Oh." And it turns out that she was this liberal old lady that I had no idea about, and she validated me. It was so life changing because at that point my family had broken up because of the war, because of hippie and the whole thing. I
Hmm.
hadn't talked to them, and all of a sudden this major person from my childhood validated me. She says, "You're right. That's exactly. We can't put up with it. We can't put up with this stuff." It was such an incredible experience. I'll never forget that moment.
Wow.
She lived to be 88, which is interesting because she was a piano teacher, and the piano has 88 keys.
Mm.
She died in a car accident. She says, well, I'm not teaching much anymore. She was about 85 at the time. She says, I don't teach before 8 in the morning anymore, and I don't teach after 10 at night.
Jeez. Oh, yeah, that's really cutting it down.
Yeah, right.
Can't do anything before 8 in the morning. So, okay. So I want to go back to when you started taking piano lessons. How old were you when that started?
7.
Wow.
Talk about luck. I went to a public school, and my second grade teacher called up my folks and said, I think Randall needs something more to do. How about piano lessons? And my parents were music fans. They said, okay. So the head of the music instruction of the Pomona Valley school system came out to my elementary school and gave me a test. I barely remember it. I think he gave me an ear test or something like that. Went out in the playground to see if I was coordinated at all, and recommended a teacher. It turned out to be Miss Johnson.
Wow, that's so interesting. So it wasn't in the school. It wasn't like exactly a school program.
No, it was not at all. It was private, but there was no. I guess there was no. There was no problem about outside,
Right.
work and stuff like that.
But I mean, your parents had to pay for the lessons?
Yeah.
That is so interesting. Huh.
My drove me. It was 15 miles away. Which was a long ways in those days.
Yeah.
She drove me once a week until I was able to drive myself. And Miss Johnson. She said. I said, how many, when I went to visit her that day, I said, how many students have you taught? She says, oh, I lost count of about 600. I said, when was that? She says, oh, about 1952. And this was 1970 or 1969.
Wow. So what was that like, making when you were studying, because all of the different stereotypes around people, studying piano and whether or not they hate it, whether or not they love it. It's a way to get away from their parents and they're making something, or for some people, it's just, it's just another chore. So how did you feel about it?
I loved doing it, although I had to be made to practice. It was the old story. Randall, have you practiced the piano today? Oh, Mom. That story. But fortunately, they made me do it, and I'm really glad they did. And Miss Johnson was a terrific teacher. She really was. She would say, she said when I saw her last, she said, well, she wouldn't say I taught people music. She says, I gave them music. I thought it was really terrific. Yeah. But yeah, I was like most kids. I didn't want to do it. I mean, I wanted to do it, but I didn't want to work at it,
Yeah.
But I stayed with it. And thanks to my folks, there was a moment at which about 16, I said, I want to quit. And they said, well, you can quit. But so you have to tell Miss Johnson. And I said, so I said, Miss Johnson, I'm thinking about quitting. And she says, you may not quit. You may not quit. You are not old enough to make a decision like that. You will continue. I said, yes, Miss Johnson. At one point, I said, I'd like to do some pop music because it was all classical. She says, okay. Yeah. I was thinking Beatles or something, or whatever it was. I guess it wasn't even Beatles time, but she says, sure. I know some pop music. Do you know Alexander's Ragtime Band?
Yeah, top of the pops at the time.
Yeah, I was thinking about Phil Spector and stuff like that.
Yeah. She's like, well, maybe we can get some Scott Joplin in. He's a Negro.
That's right.
Cool. So now you were saying also that your parents were conservative.
Yeah.
And how did that, besides any conflict, how did you feel like that came about? Was that just how they were brought up, or was it what happened to them when they, to have both of them be so conservative that they would reject you later on when you became less so?
I don't know how they became that. It was Eisenhower time, and Eisenhower Truman, and it was kind of the norm. I mean, Truman was thought to be this wild-eyed radical. Not Truman, Stevenson, who was running against Eisenhower. I don't know. It's an interesting question. I don't know how they became conservative.
Because so many people out after Roosevelt. Oh, sit back a little bit again. I'm losing your eyes in the camera. After Roosevelt being in there, a lot of people were like, Roosevelt Democrats until Truman comes along and kind of ruins everything. But
Yeah.
so they had to make that choice at some point to go
I think
from.
probably my mother was conservative, like a lot of people are today. She had to pull herself up by her bootstraps, literally. I mean, she had a
Yeah.
life and made something out of it. And I think that her feeling was, if I can do it, anybody can do it, and you don't deserve a handout. You should do it yourself,
Mm-hmm.
which is, understandable.
Yeah.
I'm a lefty, but I certainly understand where
Yeah.
she's coming from. My
You were
father,
saying. Oh, I didn't ask. With her parents, did you ever meet them?
I met her mother. Her father decamped years when she was a girl. I met her
Mm.
mother. She was not a pleasant person, and nobody liked her, including my mother. She was
Wow.
not a great lady at all. I didn't know her well, and my cousins put up with her more, and nobody ever liked her. But you put up with her
Oh,
because she was your grandmother.
right. Yeah, I had two of those.
Uh,
Um, so that's interesting having that, whatever happened to her that made her so hard in a way, but probably feeling like if the father left, then she had to work that much harder, and she passed at least that part on to her daughter.
yeah, I think so.
You
She had
know.
4 kids, and
Yeah.
they were poor, as they say, and my mom was a bit of a slave in the house. No, it was really not good. It was really a kind of a nightmare childhood that
Mm,
she really had to overcome. So I understand that her conservatism that way. I think that's the only way I've been able to understand it.
mm-hmm.
I
And
was
what about
I was a Republican through high school because that's what my parents were. I just
right?
didn't think much about it. And then when I started playing folk music and I heard about this guy named Pete Seeger, he was described to me as he's kind of a communist. He was up against the HUAC
Yeah.
meeting, stuff like that. And I said, "Oh yeah, what does that mean?" So I didn't really know anything about it. But as I got more and more into folk music at that time, the Pete Seeger gang and the whole scene was pretty left wing,
Mm-hmm.
progressive, and I began to absorb some of that thinking. And it's always made sense to me because it's basically about having regard for your fellow human.
Mm-hmm.
That's what good politics are, as far as I'm concerned. You
Yeah.
know, and
We're supposed to be in this together.
yeah, you translates into social programs and this and that. But so I kind of began to see a wider world through folk music. And then when I graduated in high school, my father was transferred by his company, which was by that time, was it still Condor? I forget. Anyways, at one of the defense companies, he worked for 2 or 3 over his career. Transferred him to Germany in 1963. So I graduated from high school and moved to Hamburg, Germany. And
Wow.
it was life changing. It was the biggest thing that ever happened to me in terms of my life. It was Germany was still, you could see war damage everywhere, and
Mm-hmm.
so there were 4 marks to the dollar. I don't know if you know what that means, but
Yeah.
we were rich. We
Right.
were
Yeah.
rich Americans in comparison. And so I learned to speak German and studied the piano with this dude who had one of Beethoven's pianos. I didn't do much
Wow.
practicing. I was really more interested in playing the guitar, blues guitar and stuff, and hanging out with the beatniks downtown Hamburg. And that's where a lot of my thinking changed. But
Mm-hmm.
then I was there for a year and did a lot of traveling. I hitchhiked all around, I mean, thousands and thousands of miles, most of the countries of Europe and stuff like that, and
Mm-hmm.
really changed my life. I mean, coming from Pomona, California, moving to Hamburg, Germany, hitchhiking around, meeting beatniks, meeting people who had progressive politics, even though I didn't even know what that was at the time, really changed my life. And then at some point, I had to go to college because I'd taken a year off between high school and college. And
Mm-hmm.
so a couple of my friends from high school were at Pomona College, and they went to the dean and said, "You got to accept this guy. He would be, good for the school." And my father just happened to be being paid more than ever before or ever since, and so he could afford Pomona, which was
Hmm.
$4,000 a year with room and board.
Wow. That's a lot for those days.
Now it's 100 grand, 120 grand.
Jeez.
I will say that Pomona College does 70% or more scholarships, full scholarships, and
Oh.
they're a very progressive place. They're diverse. The president of the college is a black woman. The vice president of the college is a black woman.
Wow.
They really do their best. During this whole pandemic, they've kept all their staff on, like the cafeteria workers and the janitors, kept them on for 6 months at full pay, and then laid them off, but kept their health care, and still they're paying their health care.
Oh, good for
So
them.
you got to shout out. I mean, they're really trying to do their best. Anyway, so I went to Pomona, and I decided to become a writing major, and then maybe I'll be a musician. And I went and met the music faculty, and I didn't like them that much. And so then I tried out for my first play, and that was it. Okay, I'll be a theater.
So now, you were saying before that you had done some shows in high school?
Yeah, I was nuts about theater in high school.
So how did that start? How did you like some people, this I was talking to one actor who literally, I think it was Rotimi Agbabiaka, said that he was kind of interested, and he was literally like walked by and said, if they have a space at the audition, then I guess I will, then it's meant to be. And he ended up going in and auditioning, and that changed his whole life. So how was that initial?
I was always into theater. My first leading role was in third grade. I was Kit Carson in a play in verse.
Huh.
And I was always in theater. I was in public schools all the way through high school, and there was always a cultural alternative. You could do music or art. And theater was kind of on the side, but I was always in plays, even and music groups too, singing groups, choirs, glee clubs. It was all public school. I mean, it was assumed that a school system would provide that education for people. What a concept,
Yeah, really. Oh, it's about more than just putting this nut on this bolt, or knowing this algorithm.
Which is all good, but it's not. We need culture. We have.
But it should be more than that.
We know about the studies about kids and culture, what it does for them. I mean, it's a crime that's not a high priority, but it was. At least it was a recognized part of the curriculum in the Pomona Valley schools, and I always had, as I say, theater and music. Unfortunately, I never had an art class because you had to have music or art, but can't complain.
Yeah. So you were acting all that time before you were even a musician. You were already performing, and did it ever occur to you like, well, this might be something that I'll keep doing?
Not until college, no. And I wasn't even sure about that. I just knew that I really loved to do theater. And I think maybe my sophomore year or so, I decided to be a theater major and kind of jumped off the cliff. It was really, taking a chance. I mean, what are the odds of surviving in your life with, a degree in theater, or even do theater? And then in 1967, I really did well in college in theater. I was very successful. I had a great time, did a lot of great stuff. I had this amazing professor named Andrew Doe, who eventually became my mentor until he died last year at the age of 90, one of the most important people in my life. And he had a wonderful theater department. We just did all kinds of stuff. And in 1967, he arranged an audition for me at Ashland, the Oregon Shakespeare Festival. So I did a summer there, which again changed my life. I came back like Superman, and did my senior.
When you were in Ashland at that point, a couple of questions. One, how are your parents feeling about you making these kind of big? Or were they still in Germany?
They were still in Germany, but that time they had moved to France. They were in Europe for 20 years. They were still on my side. They didn't mind me becoming an artist. They didn't mind that at all.
Oh, good.
They kind of looked up to that. Our troubles came later when I joined the troupe, after college.
After college. And so going to Ashland,
they were pretty supportive.
Well, that's good. When you were when you auditioned and you were at Ashland, what did you do up there?
I carried a lot of spears.
Good parts for you.
I carried a lot of spears.
So you were like an apprentice?
One thing where I stood like this with a halberd, and sat there in a scene. The next scene, I did this. Yes. I had almost no speaking roles. I met in Antony and Cleopatra. My line was, "Anthony has come into the field." That was my line.
Well, if you didn't say that, he wouldn't have come into the field.
See that?
everything would be different.
But it was incredible training. Incredible training. We rehearsed 3 plays a day, one in the morning, one in the afternoon, one in the evening, and did a rotating schedule, did it in repertory, and just lived and breathed that. And there was a great a cafe just down the street from the theater where I learned to play pool, which I still play pool. I love to play pool. But that was a great experience. It changed my life, and I got lucky. I remember I had a room. I rented a room in town because there's no housing, so you rented a room. And this guy who was also an actor, I was just started smoking weed. In fact, I scored my first lid of grass. You understand what that means.
Yeah.
And this guy was rooming with turned me in to the staff. And one of the directors, you probably know all their names, Nagel Jackson and anyway, I can't think of the others right now, but they all became, this is 1967, they all became well-known directors and theater people and ran departments and stuff. But one of the directors took me aside and said, "Randy, we hear you've been smoking." And I said, "Yes, sir." He says, "Well, this theater has got a reputation to maintain, and you're not helping with that. And so can I count on you to, change your ways?" And I said, "Yes, sir." Of course I didn't, but I was more careful about it. And then I killed my roommate. So that was,
Yeah, well, you got to do that.
Exactly.
Yeah.
What a great summer that was. That was so terrific. Wow, what an experience.
Wow. And so had you been, that's a big leap. I mean, it sounds like Pomona had been teaching some Shakespeare before that, so that it wasn't just a jump straight into Shakespeare?
Oh, we hadn't done Shakespeare. We'd studied it. We never performed it. You know what I did get in Pomona? I mean, so much, but there was a guy named Leonard Pronko who became an American expert on kabuki theater. In fact, he was one of the few Americans who were honored by the Kabuki Association in Japan as an honored, some kind of phrase like honored fellow or something like that. It was a very high honor. But he went to Japan and studied kabuki, and we did 4 productions of kabuki, one a year. Went into LA and studied with kabuki dancers and stuff like that. And I did all 4 productions and learned the moves and learned the dances, and boy, what an experience that was. Yeah, that was really terrific. And then Leonard Pronko went on to do it for another 20 years. He just died recently at 95 or 6. He was quite influential. Wow. He first was a national expert about the theater of the absurd. I knew Ionesco and people like that. But then he went on to be this master of kabuki, at least kabuki training and kabuki direction. He actually performed something. I thought it was terrible, but but what he created for us was really wonderful, really wonderful.
Wow. We
did all kinds of theater. I don't remember that we actually did Shakespeare.
So when you get up to Ashland, now you're getting thrown into Shakespeare. What was that like?
Well, like I say, I didn't have any lines, so it wasn't hard at all.
Well, now as an intern or an apprentice or something like that, did they also teach classes?
No.
To you?
No, we were too busy. We were just producing theater like mad. We did the 3 plays in repertory, and there was a show downtown that we were supposed to do for the locals, a free show. It was called The Maid of the Mill, and it was absolutely terrible. So we were working all the time. There was really no time for classes and stuff like that.
Wow. Okay, so you come back from Ashland, and they had only been around for how many years at that point?
30 years or something like that.
They've been around for 30 years at that point. So when you come back to Pomona, do you kind of come back as like a star since you've gone off to Ashland?
Yeah. Well, not a star, but I got 7 lead roles in a row. I mean, I had gone away in my junior year. I was okay, but I worked. I did a lot of stuff in theater, but I came back and I was like a head and shoulders stronger. I mean, I was a different actor, and as I said, I just kept getting lead after lead, and I won the Best Actor award and all this stuff. I guess because of what I was exposed to. I mean, all these working actors, and some of whom were professionals. A few of them were professionals. And I just soaked it up, man. It was terrific. And so I came back to Pomona, and I was not a star because I was not a star at all, but I got all these good roles, and I got even more training. It was great. Wow.
So when you
we had a street theater, we did political stuff in the street theater. We did remember Kitty Genovese, the woman who was raped and murdered in the alley, and nobody did anything about it. Which story has been modified since, but we did a piece about her, and we did a piece about the war and the draft, and on and on and on. It was a very active scene, and that was theater curriculum. That was free time, but led by Andrew Doe.
Still, yeah. And so now your parents are in Europe. How did you? Was there a space between your college, and the mime troupe? Did you, go around and do other stuff, or was it one of those like some I know happened to some people where they were just like college mime troupe?
Not really, because I had to get out of the country because I thought I was going to be drafted. This was the Vietnam War time, and we were all dodging the draft. So I was not a resident of the States because my parents lived in Europe. So I was not a U.S. resident. I was a citizen, but not a resident. So the day after I graduated, I split and went to Germany, actually France, because they were living in France by then. And so then I turned in my conscientious objector papers and left the country. And about I forget, not a very long time after that, I got my papers to go take my physical. So I went down to, that's a long story, but eventually, it's a terrible long story, but eventually I did get my conscientious objector status. And this guy says, well, what do you want to do as your alternate service? And I said, well, I just graduated in theater. I was an actor, and I had hitchhiked out. This is in D.C. I went from Germany to D.C. I hitchhiked out to San Francisco and auditioned for the mime troupe, because my director, Andrew Doe, Andy Doe, had arranged an audition with Ronnie Davis. So I went out there and I did my audition and I was accepted. So I hitchhiked back to DC and talked to these draft people, and they said, well, what do you want to do? And I said, well, I've been accepted in this theater company, and I want to do that. And they said, what is it? And I said, the San Francisco Mime Troupe. And this guy I was talking to was a retired black colonel in the Marines. He was now a bureaucrat in the draft board, right? And so I said, well, sir, it does political theater. It's called the San Francisco Mime Troupe. He says, I've seen them. And I said, oh, God. He's a satire, yes? I said, yes, sir, satire, yes, sir. Anyway, so he let me do it, and I went out.
Wow.
Hitchhiked back and went out to L.A. and arrived with 25 cents in my pocket and lost a dime on the phone. And finally got these people, and I stayed with them a few days, and I hitchhiked up to San Francisco and walked in the door and became an actor.
It's so interesting that that was counted as service for that. I mean, I just didn't know that. I was,
Well, I tell you, I've been there about a year. I've been to the troupe about a year, and I got this letter from the draft board saying, your alternate service is not acceptable.
Huh.
And I said, oh, yes, it is. I'm involved in a lot of things, and I can't just walk away from this job. And I never heard from him again.
Huh. Do you think that, like, I mean, it's weird to have somebody tell you that this is exactly what you can do. I mean, it's a very typical government stuff to have one side say, yes, this counts, and the other side say, no, this doesn't count. But I was curious when you were saying the long story part about you going to Germany and then struggling with trying to not get drafted and with selective service. What was the long story part?
I don't know if you want to take the time for that. Just back and forth, hassling with my parents, going down to Stuttgart to take my physical. I ratted my hair and put on sandals wrapped around my leggings and walked around saying, yes, sir, no, sir. and they never quite finished the physical. My mother said, I got on the train. My mother said, "Oh, never mind. I don't want to get personal, but we had a terrible time. It really busted up my family." And
because they wanted you to serve.
yeah, they wanted me to be a responsible citizen. I don't think they wanted me to go, in the army. On the other hand, that's what people did. That's what a responsible citizen does. And they wanted me to do that. They wanted me to grow up and put on a suit and go downtown and have a real job. That was where they came from. And I don't blame them for any of that. But it wasn't me. I didn't want to do it. So the long story is that it was terrible. And we busted up, and I joined the troupe. And my mom and dad came out one time to visit, and we were all packing up to go on tour, and they came in and saw the studio. It was 450 Alabama.
Yeah.
And just freaked out, and it was terrible. But the rest of the long story is we finally got it back together, thank God, and we reconciled, and it turned out okay. But boy, there were some years of real problems.
So when you auditioned for the troupe and you first got in, what did you think was going to happen? What did you know about the troupe beforehand? I mean, you said you'd seen them, but what all did you know?
I had not seen them. I got there, and I hung out a couple of days, and I went to see a show. And I guess it wasn't Lamont Militaire. It was, I forget, it was one of the comedies they were still doing.
Like Rosante or something like that.
Yeah. So I got an idea what the troupe was about, and so I put an audition together. I did a mime, and I wrote some music to the Cook song and Mother Courage and this and that. And so I put this audition together, having seen them for a few days, and I got an idea of basically who they were. And the last part of the audition was I got up with this other guy who was auditioning, and Ronnie says, "All right, you have to make the other guy laugh, and the first guy who laughs is out. You have to make this other person laugh." And so we did it, and I did make this guy laugh, and so I won, and I got in the troupe on the strength of everything else. I've always wondered who that guy was.
Yeah, what happened to him?
No, I don't know who he was, and I wonder what happened to him. I sure wish I knew.
Yeah, he's somewhere. Maybe he's still laughing. So when you got in, what did you what year was that? It's like what, 69?
69.
Yeah. And you were in line with the politics of the troupe. I guess that's around the time. That's around minstrel show, right?
No, it was after the minstrel show. The first show I was in was Turandot, or the Congress of the Whitewashers.
Yeah.
Right. And I was a musician in that show. Me and Jeffrey Lindeman and Charlie Degelman and a guy named Keith Nason, we were the band. And it was kind of strange. There was a composer at Mills College named Leonard something. I could think about it. Anyway, Ronnie knew him, and so he came over to the troupe one time. He said, "Well, what instruments do you have available?" And so we looked around, and there was a glockenspiel, and there was a couple of drums, and there were some plastic horns, and a Chinese fiddle, which I invented, or a Chinese cello, which I invented. So he wrote a score for those ridiculous instruments. So that's what we did. And the next show, as I recall, was probably Seize the Time and the Independent Female, and then the Dragon Lady. And those are the shows I was in. And we also did the thing called Gutter Puppets.
Right.
Very small shows. You remember all this.
I was 12 at this point. I don't come in until 88.
You were in it.
Yeah.
Oh, that's right. I came back in 88.
You came back, and that's when we worked together.
That's right.
I just seem like I've always been around.
Can't get rid of you.
Yeah, really. They've tried.
Yeah.
So what was that like for you? Like you come in, you audition, you're loving acting, but you also know piano and you've been studying, folk guitar, and suddenly you're in the pit. How did that?
Well,
how was
in
that?
Those days, any skill that anybody had was utilized.
Mm-hmm.
When they found out that I could play music, they asked me to not only play in the shows but start writing scores. So I wrote the score. Well, I co-wrote the score for Seize the Time. No, I wrote the score for Seize the Time. I co-wrote the score for Independent Female.
Wow.
And the Dragon Lady.
And you were in Independent Female.
Yeah, and I was in the Dragon Lady too. Strange thing about the Dragon Lady, I played this old China man named Tran Dog, no, Vietnamese. So I made up with a long mustache and did the eyebrow thing, and I talked, with an accent because I had this Chinese friend. He kind of coached me on the accent, and I look back now and I said, Jesus Christ, the white guy playing an Asian? Would not happen now, and probably should not.
No. It's interesting when, and every once in a while when we talk about some of these shows, some people come to the troupe and they see the posters or they see the pictures and they're like horrified, and it puts us in this position of, it's like, well, these were important shows at the time. We would never do that like that. But at the time, the sensibility of theater was still very, what I think of is like, the old days when the Brits thought they could, basically British actors thought they could play, they had the right to play anyone they had colonized. Yeah, right. Whether, brown face, black face, yellow face, whatever, it didn't matter. We colonized you. And I think that American theater took that cue and basically was like, well, the idea that you should be able to play anything as an actor.
Well, that's true. But on the other hand, when you think about the troupe at that time, it was all white.
Right. Yeah. If it hadn't been all white, if there had been another voice in the room, somebody might have said, like with the minstrel show, saying, okay, we're going to make a point about race and we're going to make a point of this being in blackface, but some of the actors are black. So we're making the point. Whereas the other shows,
revolutionary at the time, revolution.
Yeah. Right. And very hard hitting and very, to confuse and put the audience in an awkward space. And I think then after that, I feel like the troupe kind of was like, well, I think they gave themselves a special dispensation. Like, we are doing this stuff. We're making this other point that's not about race, but it ends up really, it's always going to be about race.
I don't think we thought about it, frankly.
Yeah.
Joni Mankin played this completely crazy, corrupt Vietnamese general called Wrong Q.
Yeah.
Which was hilarious. But it was all racial stereotypes and stuff. I don't think we thought about it. I mean, the show itself was very important. Yeah. It was about the CIA's involvement in the drug trade in Southeast Asia. And nobody was talking about stuff like that. In fact, the stuff that we did in the troupe those days, nobody else was doing it. A few theaters, maybe the Bread and Puppet Theater in Vermont, maybe something in Chicago, maybe there was something in Seattle a little bit, but nobody was doing the stuff that we were doing. And we thought that, I mean, as I say, I don't think we thought about it, about race, but we believed that what we were saying was important enough that we should do it.
So right. Yeah, and that's like you're on that leading edge, on the bleeding edge of these situations, and then afterwards you can look back and go, ooh, we're still. It doesn't de-revolutionize the work, but every good revolution is just a step, and there's going to be another revolutionary step after that, and things keep evolving. When we had the 60th anniversary and we were trying to pick scenes, and we decided to do a scene from Dragon Ladies, and it was like, well, who's going to play the part? And we ended up making a scene about the fact that it had been played by a white actor before, and Keiko did it. But part of what we discussed, part of what we discussed was at this point, because we didn't want to shy away from it, and say at this point the company made this completely other choice, and that it's one of those things where you want to go. I mean, the natural response is always to go, well, that's the way it was in those days. But at the same time, you think, well, it's just because you weren't thinking about it, like you said.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
That's just the way it was. Well, tell a black guy who can't sit down at a lunch counter. That's just the way it is. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Right. Yeah. It doesn't mean that it was right, and it becomes and the question is getting past it. So when you were doing whatchamacallit, Independent Female.
Oh, I would say, let me just say one thing about the troupe in those days. One thing that I think that we were progressive about is the role of women. And the Independent Female was directed by Denny Partridge. Well, her name was Denny Stevens. She was a woman, and she was hired as a director.
Mm-hmm.
And that, in fact, my wife Stacy, who was an actor, uh, said, "Wow, the Mime Troupe actually, hired a woman as a director in 1970, 71." I said, "Yeah, that was pretty progressive, I think." I mean,
Very, very
nowadays
progressive.
you'd say, "Well, duh," but in those days it was new, you know.
Right. Well, that's just more of the, it's like you can't break all the ground at once. You can be groundbreaking, but you're gonna miss some
Right.
stuff.
So,
Um,
so Joan Holden wrote the show, and
right.
Denny Partridge, married name was Denny Stevens. She's now Denny Partridge, directed the show.
Mm-hmm.
Joni Mangan was in it, and her mother in the show was always played by a man in drag, which was strange when you think about it.
Very British, also.
And I played yeah, really, I played the male chauvinist pig, but unaware that I was. There
Right.
was
Yeah.
there was a great moment, and we did the University of Chicago, and Joni was the ingenue. The She had to choose between Sarah Bullitt,
Yeah.
who was the feminist, and me. I was the male chauvinist.
Yeah,
Anyway,
but
she
the
had to choose.
prototypical hero because it was an ironic show.
Absolutely, we did it in melodrama style. But there was a moment at which Joan, as Gloria, had to choose between political activism or me, and she's going, "Oh, what should I do?" In melodrama, and this woman in the audience stood up and started screaming, "Sister, don't do it! Join us!" And it stopped the show, and we all just didn't know what she was screaming. She was just flipped out, and
Wow.
Joni stepped to the forward, stepped downstage and said, "Sister, I agree with you. You're absolutely right, and we are trying to educate people about this whole issue, and we need to get on with the show. So please join us." And anyway, she cooled her down, and we went on with the show. But what a moment! What
Wow.
a moment!
So it really grabbed her. It was like immediate theater.
Oh my God! Nobody had
Wow.
seen anything like that before. Nobody was talking about women's liberation. I mean, good Lord.
Yeah, well, not in that militant way. Yeah, to have
Yeah,
that.
yeah.
So now
Wait a minute. I
you
shouldn't
were
say
saying that,
talking about women's liberation. Lots of people were talking about it, but
right?
but not in theater.
Yeah, yeah. Theater was still that point of things being. When it came to civil rights, there are a lot of theaters and a lot of playwrights who were focused on metaphors and similes and loss rather than revolutionary change. And that's where the mime troupe was very much, and it's still, that idea of there has to be a revolutionary change about with people empowering themselves rather than waiting for empowerment to trickle down on them.
Here, here.
That moment, like they say, the first revolution is the one in your head.
Mhm.
So you were with the troupe for how many years at
3
that
years
point?
that time. 3 years that time. Yeah, 69, 70, 71.
So why did you leave?
I wanted to become a musician, a full-time musician.
Huh.
So
So
we
how did
formed
that
this.
shift? Because you'd been so much into acting. How did the shift to
Well,
full-time
but I was
musician come?
always doing music in the troupe. I was either playing it or writing it, or one thing or another. And at one point, we decided to have a political rock band that was formed within the troupe. And this guy named Matt Callahan, who was a guitarist and songwriter, terrific songwriter, he eventually formed a group called the Looters,
Hmm.
and they were part of the RU, and which I still have trouble with the RU, but anyway, he was a very political guy, wrote terrific songs, and his girlfriend Sandy Humphreys. I met the two of them, and we formed a band together out of the troupe, in the troupe, not of troupe members. I was the only member of the troupe, but we rehearsed at the troupe and this and that, and we called the band Red Rock,
Hmm.
right? Commies, Red Rock.
Yeah. Nice.
Anyway, so that was how I started playing music a lot in the troupe, under the auspices of the troupe, and then eventually I decided I wanted to do music full time. So I quit the troupe and we formed this band called Winter Sun, which was a political rock band, and we starved a whole lot. But we
So
did
what were you? What
benefits.
was your principal instrument at that point? You still
Oh,
piano
keyboard.
or guitar?
Oh,
Keyboard. Uh huh.
yeah, piano, yeah, keyboard. No, I've never really done much performing on the guitar. Some banjo, but no, I'm a piano player. I can play stringed instruments, but not very well. I describe my banjo playing as I started playing banjo in high school, and I can still play just about as well as I did in high school.
You peaked early and plateaued.
That's
That's
that's.
important to know. So you
But we
were
did a
did you
bunch of benefit. We were the benefit kings. We benefited everybody. We worked with all kinds of organizations, Vietnam veterans against the war, the Mission Rebels. We taught classes at the Mission Rebels, and we were very, very active. But we never made a dime, and it finally just drove us crazy, just trying to keep the thing together, going through
Mhm.
musicians, and that's where I met Harvey Robb. Harvey Robb was the bass player in our band.
Oh,
This is
uh,
before he played saxophone. He was
wow.
a lefty who came from Detroit, and he came to join us because of Matt Callahan, who had known him. Because Harvey at the time, of course, was and always was very political and very, very left wing. So he was our bass player, and then we had a series of drummers.
Like everybody does.
Yeah, oh boy, that was a nightmare. Just one guy after another trying to teach because it's all original material. So
Hmm.
anyway, that was not a very successful band, but it was a great experience. I mean, we really did a lot of work.
So what were you doing? Did you have a day job at the time?
I was anticipating this conversation. I was trying to think how I supported myself in those days. I don't
Right.
remember. I think that was the time when I started teaching piano.
Oh,
And my rent was $65 a month.
God, yeah.
Gas was 24 cents a gallon. I
God.
mean, it wasn't hard to live. And when I was in the troupe, we went down, we lived 4 and 5 people in the house together. Also, the beginning of the Pickle Family, but that's another
Mm.
story. We'd go down to the produce market in the morning and get the stuff they threw away and
Mm.
brought it home and divided it up. And we lived on that. I mean, when I joined the troupe, we paid ourselves $25 a week. And we
Wow.
lived, and we until we decided to raise it to $30 a week. And there was this big argument. Most people were against the raise.
Hmm.
So it was easy
Yeah.
to
Well,
live, but I don't really remember how I supported myself after the troupe. I didn't have a day job. No, I haven't had a day job since, well, since before the troupe. Yeah, since
since
then.
your root beer days.
Yes. Well, well, no, in college, like I say, I worked a lot of day jobs
Oh,
in
yeah,
college,
right.
but
Yeah.
after college, I haven't worked a day job.
Hmm. Cool. Good for you.
I think that
Um, or at least you've wiped them from your mind.
yes. What
So
mind?
you ended up working for the Pickles at some?
Well, Larry Pizzoni came to the troupe one day and said he came from New York City, and where he'd worked with the Electric Circus and Hovey Burgess and others, Hovey and Judy Burgess, who is now Judy Finelli. Anyway, Larry came to the Pickle and said, "I'd like to propose a course of study that I would train you all in." He said it's juggling, tumbling, and equilibrium.
Hmm.
Equilibrium translated itself into stationary trapeze and a few other things.
Hmm.
So we learned to juggle. We all learned to juggle, first with balls and then with clubs, and then tumbling and contortionism to some degree, although that was not a lot of it, but tumbling
Yeah.
and as I say, stationary trapeze. And so we took these courses from Larry, and they were terrific. They were really terrific. And keep in mind, we were all 21, 22 years old,
Right.
so really easy to
Limber.
do. Yes,
You had knees.
yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. So so we did that with Larry, and eventually he became an actor in the troupe. He was in Dragon Lady, and I can't remember what else, but he was certainly in Dragon Lady. But then he decided to go off on his own and I'm getting this story straight now. I think I've lost track, obviously. He left the meme troupe to found the Pickle Family, and we went with him. So Winter Sun came after that. I left the Pickle to join. I mean, I left the meme troupe to join the circus, I guess. It must have been.
Wow.
But along the way, there was this group called Make a Circus that was founded by this guy named Peter Frankham and
Yeah.
Jeff Hoyle. Jeff Hoyle and Peter had done this. It was a very socially relevant work in the housing projects in London. and it was a terrific organization. So we did the first year of that. Larry and Jeff Hoyle and Bill Irwin and me and Queenie, Joan Mackin and Don Forrest and several other people. I'm sorry to leave them out, but so we did that. It was did them it was a free show in the parks. I couldn't get away from that. Some days, actually, years later, I actually did a paid show indoors, but
weird.
Yeah, but we did that for a while, and then we formed the Pickle out of that.
Huh. I did not know that. I always wondered what the relationship was between Make a Circus and the Pickles. So Make a Circus started in London?
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Wow. That makes sense with Hoyle. I just never talked to him about
London. It was England. It may have been some other town in London, but it was certainly England.
Huh.
You'd have to ask Jeff. But yeah, it started there, and it started with poor kids, as it did here.
Yeah.
Working with kids. But the idea that everybody should understand, the Pickle Family Circus was started as a service organization. It was started as everywhere we went, we were a benefit for a local organization, a fundraiser for a local organization. And that was the principle when it started. It was started by Larry Pizzoni, Peggy Snyder, and Michael Nolan. And Michael Nolan doesn't get much credit. And
that's true.
He should get more credit. The three of them really put it together and hired a bunch of us. Larry called me up and said, I'd like you to put a band together for this circus that I'm putting together. And he says, we want the music to be as important as what's on stage.
Wow.
That sounds right to me. So I was living with several musicians. So I got them and a couple of other people, and we put the band together. But the real point about the circus was that it was a service organization. And up and down the West Coast, there were, usually it was a child care consortium that was like, an organization that oversaw a dozen or 24 child care organizations in the town. And we did the benefit for them. So they set up the Midway, which was the booths where you had concessions and games and stuff like that. And they kept all that money. And we took, we got tickets. We supported ourselves on ticket sales. But it was a mutual organization, and a mutual cooperation thing. And we became part of a community all the way up and down the West Coast because of that.
Mm-hmm.
And it was
I did not know that.
Wonderful experience, theatrical experience, and it was training for all of us. But that was the point of it. And Larry is the first person to say, listen, this is what we decided to do. And we did that. And it really was very successful because of that, because we became a part of every community that we served. We were serving them, hence we became part of that community.
Huh. Wow. So how long were you with the Pickles?
7 years.
Wow.
The first 7 years of the Pickle, yeah.
And how far afield did the Pickles go when you were with them?
Went to Alaska and back, and 1 year we went to London, did 7 weeks in London at the Roundhouse Theatre in the worst snowstorm in 50 years and during a British rail strike. We lost our shoes.
But that was when so Bill Irwin was with you guys and Hoyle.
Yeah, Bill Hoyle and Jeff. Larry did their wonderful Three Musicians act, and they were a big part of that.
Huh.
Go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, so in that time, did you feel like you were still each step of, especially with being a musician and going, say, okay, were you also doing your rock band at the same time, the Winter Sun group?
No. And like I say, I've lost track of when Winter Sun was. It must have been after all that, but it couldn't have been after that. Because I got married and moved to San Diego out of the Pickle. No, I've lost track.
Now, were the Pickles seasonal?
Pardon me?
Were the performances and stuff with the Pickles, was that seasonal?
Or was it all year? And then it became year round, but originally it was just 3 months or something, like 3 months of the year. But then a thing called CETA, Comprehensive Education and Training Act, which was a national support for artists, especially artists who did community kind of work. A guy named Stephen Goldstein, who also doesn't get enough credit, he was the head of a group called Neighborhood Arts at the time, and he handed out he arranged to get a bunch of these CETA grants, and there must have been 6 or 8 of us in the Pickle family who were CETA artists. But the money also went to all kinds of organizations around the city, and allowed them to survive. And again, Stephen doesn't get the credit that he probably should have, and that program doesn't, because boy, if we had that, things would be different. It was like the WPA that supported so many artists. It was very similar to that.
Yeah, people don't even remember CETA. I mean, by the time I came along, CETA was one of those things that I remember being. People were still talking about. I still remember the logo and stuff like that. But I think I just missed it. But so the reason I asked about the seasonal stuff was I was thinking, well, maybe you were doing Winter Sun in the off season and then doing Pickles.
That's quite possible. Yeah, that's quite possible. I was there, so I don't remember. You know what I
mean? I'm going to use that line.
Well, that's the classic line about the 60s, right? If you were there.
Right. Yeah. If you can remember.
Winter Sun was probably within that time period, yeah, because then I came back to the troupe in 1988 and 89, which is when I met you.
Right.
And we did a Seeing Double. What a wonderful show. And incidentally, I've told a lot of people how brilliant you were in that show.
Oh, thank you.
Right. Michael Gene Sullivan did 2 roles. He was it was a comedy of errors, or what was it? Comedy of errors, Shakespeare. But this plane crash. There's 2 kids on a plane, and it crashes. One of them is a Palestinian kid, and one of them is a Jewish kid on his way to the kibbutz. And Palestinian kid is on his way home. Well, there's a plane crash, and they both get sort of knocked in the head. And so the Palestinian kid ends up in the kibbutz, and the Jewish kid ends up with the Palestinians. It was a fucking brilliant show, and you were amazing doing the dual role. You really were, I gotta say.
Thanks a lot. Thank you.
It was your first experience with the troupe.
Yeah. Well, I came in. I'd come. Oops, there's your boobs.
Sorry.
I'd come in to audition before, because I started seeing the troupe in the late 70s. My father brought me to see the troupe when I was in high school. And he was like, here's something that you'll like. It's got comedy, it's got theater, and I was not into theater yet. But it's got politics. It's like comedy and politics, and that's what I was into.
Was your father political?
Oh, I'm sorry, what?
Was your father political?
Oh, yeah. Both my parents were very political.
Uh-huh.
The short story I could tell you really fast is the reason when I was a little kid in L.A. until I was like 7. Yeah, until I was 7. And my parents would, like, at night, they both worked a bunch of jobs, and they would go to like Black Panther meetings down there, and big.
That's pretty political.
Yeah, and then my mother was a Kennedy girl for Bobby Kennedy. And she was there when he was assassinated.
Really? She was in the hotel?
Yeah. She was in the room.
In the room?
Yeah, she was in the room.
Killed?
Yeah, and so when
you mean she saw him get shot?
I'm not sure if she saw it, but what ended up happening was our whole family stayed up that night, and we're waiting for the results because she's working for him, and we all know what it means. And when he was assassinated, she came home, and then and we ended up being up all night. And then the next day, or within a couple of days, she left and she flew back to Detroit, where both sides of my family are from. And she went to Detroit, and then she was there for about a month. And then when she came back to Los Angeles, the whole family packed up and moved to San Francisco. And we didn't know until my father died, as I was saying earlier, that what happened was the FBI had approached my family and said, we're worried that my mother might have been a witness, and they were worried about the witnesses getting killed like they did after JFK's assassination. So they said, where do you guys want to go? Because we want to put you in a kind of witness protection.
Wow.
And during that period when my mother was out of town, she was in hiding. I was driven to school by the FBI every day. And then my parents picked San Francisco as the place they wanted to go because they figured the revolution was going to start in San Francisco, and they wanted to be at the epicenter of the revolution. So the FBI moved us to San Francisco. We couldn't tell our friends where we were moving. It was really very quick. And that was just it. We were just picked up and put here, and that was it. We stayed here all, ever after. So I grew up in a very political family.
Wow. Were they members
so,
of the Panther Party?
No, they were not. I don't think they were ever members, but they were definitely. Oops, I'm looking at your boobs again.
Sorry. You don't like that?
Sorry, it's just I've got to focus, man. And so I remember when I was a kid, when we got up here, one day my parents couldn't get like a babysitter for me, so they took me to this meeting in Oakland where we like had to drive around the block a bunch of times and go into an apartment and then through that apartment and down some back stairs and through a tunnel up into another building and stuff. And that's where they could have the meeting. And they kind of sat me off to the side and they talked. They ended up being supporters because they both had, like my father was working in Silicon Valley. My mother was working downtown. So they had money. So they were giving money to the Panthers. But they weren't like, wearing berets and stuff.
Yeah. I remember one day at 450 Alabama, we were doing Seize the Time, which was a play about the Chicago 7 trial, the Chicago 8 trial, whichever way you want to think about it. And in one day we were working on it, in walks Bobby Seale and Eldridge Cleaver.
Wow.
So we hung out with them a little bit, and I was quite impressed because we were big fans of the Panther Party. We didn't join it. We weren't black, or even I guess there were members too. I don't know, but we were big supporters, and we were doing this show, and they were very glad, and they came and advised us and stuff.
Oh wow, it's been amazing. So at this point, when you came back to the troupe, to do, I was going to say so my first show, I'd always wanted to be with the troupe. I'd always wanted to audition, and I was doing Shakespeare and stuff like that. And I wanted to audition, but I was always told I was too young to be in any of the shows. And then eventually they cast me as a replacement actor for Rip Van Winkle. And then when Seeing Double came around, the person they wanted to cast dropped out, and I got the part.
Who was the person?
I think they wanted Ron Moriera.
What? I don't even know who that is.
Oh, Ron had done. He's very good, and he'd done a bunch of shows with the troupe. He had done the remount of Dragon Lady, actually.
Well, but that was after my time because I don't know that guy.
Yeah, no, he's really funny. He was in National Theater of the Deranged with Elvin and Diane Amos. He's really funny, and he's still doing a lot of very activist work in the South Bay. Great performer. But anyway, so what came up that you ended up coming back to the troupe for Seeing Double?
I'm pausing because I have no idea. It may have been the influence of Bruce Barthol because he and I wrote the scores for both of those shows.
Right.
And I came back to the troupe and I did the whole thing. I was in the band and did, worked in the parks and everything. I don't know what brought me back to the troupe. That's an interesting question. As you can see, I've lost a lot of the connections of my past. I mean, there's been so many things in so many years, and
hey, it's not like it's coming off like you don't remember stuff. So how did you meet Bruce? Just kind of crossing in the musical world?
I met Bruce through Phil Marsh, who was a guitar player, eventually became the band leader, or at least the stage leader for the Pickle Family. And after he left, I became the stage leader. But Phil was a very influential guy in Berkeley, not an overtly political guy, but certainly his content was aware and informative and analytical. But he wrote these great songs, and he had a band called Energy Crisis. And I think and Bruce was the bass player for that band. I think that's probably where I met Bruce, but I don't really remember.
So you guys ended up coming back to write for Seeing Double, and you knew Joan from.
Yeah, I know Joan. Well, Joan Holden or Joan Mankin?
Yeah, Holden.
Holden, yeah. I mean, I worked with her in '69.
Right.
She was there then. Yeah. I mean, that was an interesting time. Ronnie Davis, R.G. Davis was still there, and Sandy Archer was his girlfriend, but extremely important in the mime troupe in those days, and a terrific, amazing actor, terrific comedian, Just,
I never met Sandy Archer. It
oh,
is so
that's
weird. I've heard
bad.
nothing but that she was wonderful and great and brilliant and funny and all of that.
Not
I
to
never
mention
met her,
drop
never saw
dead
her
gorgeous.
perform.
Not to mention drop dead gorgeous. Just amazingly beautiful woman, and a comrade, a real comrade. I mean, everybody in the troupe at that point was really a comrade, and it was
Mhm.
really something.
So what
But
was it
anyway,
like to
Joan
come
Holt
back?
was there. Joan Mencken came in just after me.
Uh-huh. Uh-huh. Yeah. And then she left and went off with the Pickles and everywhere else.
Yeah,
Um, and she did come back and do some mime troupe shows a couple of times, directed for us, and was in some shows later in the 90s and even into the 2000s. But so when you came back to the troupe in the late 80s, what was that like? How did that feel?
it was great. I loved it. Yeah, I felt like I hadn't even been gone or something. I don't know. I guess I'd been to San Diego. I was probably even I was a father by then, for Christ's sake. I had a 5-year-old kid. I'd gone
Wow.
to I got married out of the Pickle and moved to San Diego, which was the worst mistake of my life. Anyway, and the marriage dissolved
Why did you move to San Diego?
because I'd been on the road for years and years, and my wife's parents had this. The grandfather was moving out of the house to go into a home, and they said, "Well, if you'd like to have this beautiful, it was actually a pretty nice place on a quarter acre of land with a bunch of trees. You could have it for the rent you're paying now." We said, "Okay, one place is pretty much as good as another when you're on the road." Big mistake. I left everything I knew in San Francisco, all my contacts, everything, and spent 4 terrible years in San Diego. It was just the worst nightmare. It was a
Wow.
right town, and I was playing in bar mitzvah band. Nothing wrong with the bar mitzvah band, but my particular version of it was a nightmare. A
Hmm.
couple of women ran it. They screamed at us on stage, and it was it was bizarre.
Gee.
Although it was a kind of a ruling class organization. One time we went we went up to Hollywood to a bar mitzvah. We did that a lot on a camper van or whatever it is in a RV, and went up to LA to do big money bar mitzvahs. And one time we played the Friars Club, and I looked out this piano I was playing, and there was a little plaque inside that said "Gift of Chico Marx."
Wow.
Yeah, which I'm a Marx Brothers fan, believe it or not.
Yeah.
And
Oh,
so I was
wow.
thrilled to do that. But mostly it was a nightmare in San Diego. And then we had a baby. I went back to school. I studied. I took an undergraduate degree in music and composition and stuff, and had a baby. And marriage broke up. And well, first we moved back here, and then the marriage broke up. It was really not meant to be. And
Was
that's
she
probably
also a performer or in
no,
the in?
no, she was not. She was in the Pickle. She was head of front of the house.
Oh,
She
uh-huh.
did, the box office and the tickets and everything. Very good. She was very good at that, and she was a valuable member. But she was never been a performer. No.
Hmm.
So I guess it was after all of that that I said, well, hell, somebody offered me a job on the troupe, I guess, and so I started writing the show with Bruce. I wish I could remember all these details. I should probably look it up. You could look it up.
Yeah.
But I was, back full time with the troupe.
Hmm.
And that was a terrific show. I really loved Seeing Double. I really loved Rip Van Winkle too. Arthur Holden did an amazing job as Rip Van Winkle. But what
Yeah.
I remember, there were all kinds of wonderful performers in that. But what I remember really is Audrey. I want to say Howard.
Audrey
No,
Smith.
what?
Hmm?
Audrey. What was her name? I'm blanking on her
Smith.
last name.
I think.
Audrey Smith. Yes.
Yeah.
Did these wonderful roles, just one after
Yeah.
another, completely different. She did this black street punk, and then she
Mhm.
did a consumer at Whole Earth Access.
Yeah.
Whole
Hold
Earth
her
Access.
access. Yes.
But she was so wonderful, and she's gone. Just died a year or two ago. I just want to shout out to her because she was really a wonderful part of that show. There were so many good performers in that show. Wow, I really loved that show, and I thought Seeing Double was equally good. The best thing about Seeing Double was our cooperation with the Arab community in San
Hmm.
Francisco, and the woman whose name I can't think of, who was so, I mean, she basically co-wrote the show. I
Oh,
could think,
Emily Shahade.
Yes, exactly.
Yes.
And that was really a terrific experience because of the cooperation between the two or three communities,
Mm-hmm.
political
Yeah.
communities, and that was really remarkable, I thought.
Yeah. And it was like that everywhere we went with that show, having,
Yeah.
even when we played in, Palestine, Israel, having people from different communities come and see the show and talk. And some people would say, this is the first time I've actually spoken with a Palestinian, or spoken with an Israeli, because they were like in the post-show discussions. Mime Troupe shows are short enough so you can have a significant post-show discussion. And it was really amazing to have that experience, and the struggle we had in the United States, because we went around and we got like bomb threats in the U.S. I remember when we went to Boston and they were like, oh, you're gonna get bombed in Boston. And then we played New York and they were like, all this stuff was gonna happen. Every place we went, there were threats and phone calls, and the home office was saying all this stuff was gonna happen. And at one point they were definitely going to try to shut down the performance. I can't remember which one it was. And there was a right-wing leader of a very Orthodox community, and he died. And so the day of our performance, which they were going to disrupt, was his funeral. So they couldn't come and disrupt
Oh my God.
Right. But we had so much support from, the Palestinian American and Jewish American communities. What?
Did you guys off that guy?
Yeah, well, I'm not going to say anything because I'm recording. But, having that experience, and then, like I said, going over to Palestine, Israel, and having people be so afraid for us, but at the same time, the reception was great. That they were like, we had to change where we were going to. Did you go over to Jerusalem with us?
No.
When we went, they were saying we were supposed to play in an open air space, and they said, if you play in this space, someone will throw a grenade at you, so you can't perform there.
Whoa.
And then they moved it to another spot, and they said, well, there's a tower overlooking that spot. There could be a sniper that shoots at you. And it turned out like we performed at one point. We performed in West Jerusalem, and then we picked up the whole set and moved to East Jerusalem and did some shows. That the only people who were upset was part of the government, but the audiences were fine. Everybody knew what we were doing. We went off and did songs on the kibbutz, and songs in the West Bank, and in refugee centers, and all of these different places. And everyone was just so happy we were talking about this.
Were the audiences mixed?
Yes, and the audiences were mixed. It was really more. It was interesting having us be in many ways much more blocked when we were playing in the United States. And this was during the Intifada, and so people were wanting to in Palestine, Israel. So people wanted to have some kind of conversation going on. So, and I mean, we did that show. I mean, that show is the reason I'm still with the company, because they did it for 2 years off and on, and they had to keep using me. Well, they didn't have to, but they did. And so, and then they're like, well, we don't have time to recast the summer show. Michael, do you want to be in the summer show? And I was like, I'm here anyway, So I just kept being in things until finally they were like, oh, fine. Do you want to be in the collective? And
really?
I said,
it took a while?
Oh, yeah. Well, no, it did take a real long. They asked me and I said no. Originally. I said no.
Smart answer.
Smart answer. I said no because I was just like, I saw all the meetings these people had to go to. And I was like, I don't want to do that. And then, and also there's the idea that you couldn't do anything else except for the Mime Troupe. And then just at that point, Sharon Lockwood started to do other shows more. And so it became okay in the off season to do something else. And then I was like, okay, well, now I can be in the company because I'm going to be in other shows. And so it worked out, and they could never get rid of me.
That's so strange. You can't be something else, can't do anything else. That sounded like Central Committee or something.
Yeah. Well, it was supposed to be, the original idea was, well, once you're in the company, you've got to do 2 years and you can't do anything else. But what happened was the company's big national tours, the funding for national tours started to fall off. And suddenly colleges couldn't afford stuff. And so there was no winter tour. And people had to get into another show or take another job. And then we weren't doing national tours every fall anymore. And so it got loose, like I said, and then if there's not a part for you in that show, there are enough performers and musicians that if there's not a part for you, what are you supposed to do? You've got to get other stuff. So it loosened up a lot, and it allowed us to work with more people, and it allowed people to not have to get day jobs, because that's just at the point where it became expensive to live in San Francisco.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm another one of those. I've never had a day job person, which means that
you're broke is what it means.
Yeah, basically, yeah. And you're always looking for work. Always looking for work.
To Denny Partridge the other day. Our friend Jeffrey Lindeman, who was a great friend of mine, and I met him in a mime troupe in 1969, and he was the tech guy, he was the shop guy, and one of my dearest friends. I was the best man at his wedding and everything. We've been great friends for 52 years. He just died about a month ago or less.
Yeah.
And so I was talking to Denny Partridge, who was the director of Independent Female, and we were talking about how incredibly formative that period in our lives was for us. And we said formative, not even a strong enough word. It was, it just determined the rest of our lives. And I said, yeah, that's why I'm still broke. And she says, me too.
Yeah. That one moment you're like, I could go to New York I'll work for the mime troupe.
Yeah.
So we got a little while left. I want to so after seeing Double in the 90s, I know I started hearing about you working at other places, like you were, at other theater companies. I remember, I think the next time I saw you after that, you were doing something at ACT.
I did a show with Bill Irwin.
Oh yeah, right.
It was called Scapin. It was a 16th century sort of an early commedia dell'arte. Jeff Hoyle was in it, and among other people. And so I put Keith Terry, I talked Keith Terry going back and playing a drum set, which he had. He was one of the Pickle drummers, but he got off into this body music thing right after the Pickle, and has become enormously successful, worldwide successful at that. But I talked him into playing drum sets, so he and I were the band for that show at ACT, and that was a fun experience. That was the first time that I'd ever had a real budget, and somebody said, I said I need that, and they said right away, we'll get that for you. It was an amazing experience, because I'd always been, poor theater, always, usually because it was political. But boy, ACT was a luxury. It was amazing. What a sweet experience, and everybody treated us well, and everybody worked there was a real pro and was terrific to work with, and I got nothing bad to say about that. It was a terrific experience. Of course, Bill is wonderful.
Yeah. Did Scapin go anywhere else, or did you just play San Francisco?
Just San Francisco.
Wow, because I saw the show. It was really good.
Yeah, I thought so. I thought it was good. Yeah, I forget 6 weeks or 8 weeks or something. I forget.
Yeah. I remember seeing you. You guys the band was like off to the side.
Yeah, stayed right.
Yeah. I think I waved at you during the show or something. So and during all this time now, you'd been starting to teach a while ago.
Yeah.
And had you been always teaching privately, or were you working with the school or anything?
Well, I was always teaching. I started out privately, not having any idea how to teach piano, except for the fact of all my years with Miss Johnson.
Right.
Where she was a wonderful teacher. So I think that I succeeded as a teacher as well as I did because of her, but it was mostly private. And then I got involved with one organization or another. I've now been at Ruth Asawa School of the Arts.
Right.
About 10 or 12 years. I'm not sure. I teach once a week for 8 weeks each semester. I teach the pianists improvisation, and they are all classical players, and so they have not improvised. And so in fact, I did it today on Zoom. Anyway, but it's a wonderful job, and it's wonderful kids. I've spent, I guess the first idea was to talk about what one has done since the Mime Troupe. And I was thinking, well, I've done a whole lot of work with kids. I mean, years and years and years of stuff with kids. And I'm real proud of that work. I talk to the kids who are now adults and have kids themselves, and they talk about what an important experience that was for them, and I feel very rich by that. But I sure disappeared from the scene because nobody comes to the children's theater. But that's okay. It was terrific. I spent, God, I don't know, 7 years at Contra Costa College with a theater program, youth theater program. Wrote another 10 shows or something, and then I worked with something called the San Francisco Arts Education Project, which is run by Emily Keeler. Wrote with Danny Duncan. I co-wrote another 8 or 10 shows with them.
Oh, that's right. Yeah.
Did
you guys were together for a while, right?
Oh yeah. They've been together. I think they've just celebrated some major anniversary, like 50 years or something like that. But wow. Danny Duncan, who was the librettist and playwright, and I wrote at least 8 or 10 shows with him, some of which involved 800 kids at Stern Grove.
Oh, that's right. Those huge shows at Stern Grove.
Holy shit. Can you believe that? I mean, that only happened because the staff of Arts Ed are about taking artists into the school systems and teaching classes. And that's what that was about. I've always been in service. That's why, like I say, I'm still broke. But it was an amazing organization and they still do it. They go into the schools and they teach classes and they organize. And then for a lot of it, it results in a show at the end of the year. They're no longer doing the huge show anymore. They have a company now, a performing company, until before COVID, which would put on a show or two a year, a company of like 30, 40. But there are artists now who are working professional artists. I mean, I'm trying to think of his name. I can't think of his name. Rodney Earl Jones.
Yeah.
Was one of our kids. He just, he was working in the Book of Mormon on Broadway, and now he has co-founded a theater called Bay Area Theater Company or whatever it is. That does things in schools with kids, along with Jamie Ewan-Shore, who was also one of our kids. So a lot of these kids have gone on to a lot of kids I taught, and not just me, but me as a part of an organization, have really, found work in theater, and many of them are interested in community service like we were.
Well, that's where you come from, and you appreciate it. Now, this is going to sound like an off-the-wall question, but just by any chance, did you ever work with somebody named Diane Price or Diane Grilly?
Well, that name's familiar. Diane Price. She
ran the San Francisco Musical Theater Company. She founded that, and it was a youth theater.
The thing down in Half Moon Bay or something like that?
No, it's in San Francisco. You guys probably ran into each other at some point because she also taught Rodney. He was also part of her group too, probably when he got a little older. I was just curious.
Wow, that sounds familiar, but I don't think that we did any real work together.
When you were working with Danny Duncan, how did you guys end up together? Were you just kind of put together, or did you?
I was put together by Emily. Yeah, he had been working with Emily. That jerk, man, I can't stand that guy. Just kidding. He's a wonderful guy. We did a whole bunch of really terrific shows, and he's still a great friend. The thing that difficulty with Danny was he always on music first. Right, we were writing songs together. He insisted on music first, which is far more difficult than writing music for lyrics.
That's hard. Yeah.
It was. So the revenge I got, I wrote stuff that was too complex for his words. No, we worked really well together, and we did a bunch of shows, and he's a real pro and a terrific guy, and he's not in the greatest health right now. I called him up the other night. He says, "Randy, I got everything wrong with me." So that's too bad. But he's still working. He's still directing shows, and working with Arts Ed.
Good for him.
Yeah. Terrific guy.
Wow. I did not know that he was still working. I only worked with him one time, so and he only lives he's always lived somewhere 10 blocks from me.
He lives on Waller.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. Right near the Cultural Center. Which is run by not Waller. No, not Waller at all.
That other street. I can't remember what it's
called.
It
was right near the
right near the burn. Yeah.
Which is run by an alumna of our theater program. The woman
Really?
who wrote that was a kid with us.
Huh. And Rodney's company is based in that building also.
I'm not surprised. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's all a big family, you know. And those kids who are now adults and accomplished adults stayed together. I mean, they said we got something good here. They stayed as like a family, and they are now producing art and community service and education and stuff. It's terrific.
Wow. Okay. Well, I think that we have
Wait a minute. I want to talk about 20 minutes about my love life. I mean, come on.
There's always 20 minutes of love life.
Actually, in my case, it's about 5 minutes, but it's okay. That's not true. That's not true. I'm married to Stacey Ross, and I'm the happiest man in the world. And
A
she's the
wonderful
greatest
actor.
wife.
Yeah.
And terrific partner and lady and everything.
Yeah, Stacey's one of those people that, for me, I've always, when I see her in things, there's always this like, what I think of is the madness of performance, that she throws herself into the parts so deeply. And she and I have never actually worked together. We've only done readings, and we finish a reading and we're always like, we've got to work together. And it's like, it's not up to us.
Yeah.
But she's always so brilliant to watch.
Yeah. I'm surprised to hear that you haven't, but now that I think about it, yeah, it's true you haven't. Yeah. Well, It will happen. I bet it will happen.
It will happen at some point. Okay, well, thank you so much for, I love doing these interviews because I just learn all of this stuff about these people that I kind of know, but in theater, you're always passing by folks.
Yeah.
You work with them for a few weeks and then you're on to the next thing. And so this gives me a chance and the audience a chance to kind of get to know people they think they kind of know. Like now I know that you were a draft dodging hippie who worked for the Mime Troupe.
Well, I'm not dodging the draft anymore, but I'm still a hippie. People accuse me of being an ex-hippie. I said, no, I'm not an ex-hippie. I'm still a hippie.
Which is important. I tell people that, and it's like, no. If you're an ex-hippie, you were never really a hippie in the first place. You were a poser.
Let me just say one more thing that to everybody, if everybody's listening still after all this. The Mime Troupe has been, the Mime Troupe has been an amazingly important cultural entity in the world and in the theater community, and I am proud to have been a part of it.
Thank you so much. Thanks. It's like I said, that's where I met you, and I was always like, this guy is so good. He's so funny. He's so interesting. He's just so, and I was always disappointed that it's like, I don't get to work with him again because he went off and did other stuff.
Well, likewise.
But hopefully at some point we'll still get a chance to work together.
I hope so, too.
We'll see.
We didn't even talk about the veterans of the Abraham Lincoln Brigade stuff.
Oh, God, yeah.
But there's too much to talk about.
That's its own. I should probably do another thing where it is just about, Valb and Alba and that tie to history, which, and how important that is. When I first got into the troupe, I really didn't know much, and I was a history major, and I really didn't know much about. I knew about the war, I knew about the Civil War, I knew stuff, but wasn't part of me in the same way. And so, for all of us, you and me, and and Valina and Bruce and Joan and all of the people who kind of worked on those things over and over again, to realize how much you're part of a tradition.
Yeah.
Oh
man, I was so proud to be part of that. I didn't know anything about it either when I first got involved. Judy Montel asked me to do the soundtrack for the film Forever Activists, and I didn't know enough, so I was smart enough to call up Bruce Barthol and say, "You want to do this thing together? Because you really know about this." So we did it together, and I didn't know anything about it either, and proud now to have been.
Yeah, to be able to get the word out to more and more folks. Like there's some movie that series
you're frozen.
Or something.
That means we're very.
Oh, that might mean we're done.
I'm sorry, you're breaking up now, so it must be.
Must be time to finish. Okay. Thanks a lot, Randy.